What happens when Hollywood's most fearless talk show host goes head-to-head with royalty over the most controversial topics of our time? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Bill Maher for what was supposed to be a standard celebrity interview, but quickly spirals into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Tonight's episode delivered drama that nobody saw coming, with tensions escalating to a breaking point that left audiences stunned and one guest storming off the set in fury. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The atmosphere in the studio was electric as Prince Harry made his entrance, waving to the audience with that familiar royal smile. Bill Maher, ever the gracious host, stood to greet him with a firm handshake and his trademark grin. The crowd erupted in applause as Harry settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket and flashing that charming smile that had won over millions worldwide. But beneath the surface pleasantries, something felt different tonight. Maher's eyes held a glint of mischief, and those who knew him well could sense he was ready to pounce. "Prince Harry, welcome to real time," Maher began, his voice carrying that familiar blend of warmth and barely contained irreverence. "I have to say, it's not every day we get actual royalty on the show. Though I suppose in America, we're all about overthrowing monarchies, right?" The audience chuckled, but Harry's smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, Bill, I think you'll find I'm not exactly your typical royal these days," he replied, his British accent crisp and confident. "I've been living the American dream, as they say." Maher leaned back in his chair, already sensing an opening. "The American dream, sure. But let's talk about the American nightmare you've been putting your family through. All this public drama, the tell-all books, the Netflix series. It's like watching a very expensive soap opera, except the actors are real people with real feelings." Harry's posture stiffened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what Meghan and I have been trying to accomplish. We're simply trying to tell our truth and create positive change in the world." "Your truth," Maher repeated, emphasizing the words with air quotes. "See, that's where you lose me, Harry. There's not your truth and my truth. There's just the truth. And the truth is, you've been airing your family's dirty laundry in public for years now, making millions off of it, while simultaneously claiming you want privacy." The audience fell silent, sensing the shift in tone. Harry's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward slightly. "With respect, Bill, I don't think you understand the full context of what we've been through. The media harassment, the racism my wife faced, the complete lack of support from the institution." "Oh, here we go," Maher interrupted, his voice rising with passion. "The racism card. Look, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, of course. It does. But you married into the most traditional, centuries-old institution on the planet, and then you act shocked when they don't immediately bend to your every whim? It's like joining the Marines and then complaining about the uniform." Harry's face reddened, and his voice grew sharper. "This isn't about uniforms, Bill. This is about my wife being driven to the point of having suicidal thoughts because of the treatment she received. This is about our son's security being taken away because we dared to step back from duties that were destroying our mental health." Maher didn't back down. "And I'm sorry about that, I really am. Mental health is serious business. But let's be honest here. You've turned your pain into a brand. You've got book deals, streaming deals, speaking engagements. You're literally profiting off of your family drama while claiming to be victims." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and even the camera operators seemed to sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. Harry's hands clenched into fists on his lap, and his voice carried a dangerous edge. "You think this is about money?" Harry asked, his voice low but filled with barely contained anger. "You think I wanted to leave everything I'd ever known, walk away from my family, my country, my duties, for a paycheck?" "I think," Maher said, leaning forward with the intensity of a prosecutor making his closing argument, "that you've been manipulated by people who saw dollar signs when they looked at you. I think you've been convinced that your family is the enemy when they're probably just trying to preserve an institution that survived for 1,000 years." Harry shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "Don't you dare bring my wife into this. Don't you dare suggest she manipulated me. You don't know her, you don't know us, and you certainly don't know what we've been through." Maher remained seated, but his voice grew louder, more defiant. "I know what I see, Harry. I see a man who had everything: respect, purpose, a role in history, and threw it all away because he couldn't handle the pressure. And now you're trying to rewrite history to make yourself the hero of your own story." The audience was dead silent now, the usual laughter and applause replaced by an electric tension that seemed to charge the very air. Harry stood there, towering over Maher, his chest heaving with barely controlled fury. His hands trembled slightly, and those close enough could see the veins in his neck standing out prominently. "You want to know about pressure?" Harry's voice was now a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. "Let me tell you about pressure. Pressure is walking behind your mother's coffin at 12 years old while the world watches. Pressure is having every relationship, every mistake, every human moment scrutinized and twisted by people who've never lived a day in your shoes." Maher's expression softened for just a moment, but then his combative instincts kicked back in. "And I'm sorry for that loss, Harry. I really am. Diana was extraordinary. But you're not honoring her memory by tearing down everything she worked within the system to change. You're burning it all down and walking away." Harry's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Don't you dare invoke my mother's name to justify your ignorance. She would have understood exactly why we had to leave. She would have supported us getting away from the same institution that failed to protect her." The confrontation was reaching a fever pitch, and everyone in the studio could feel it. This was no longer a talk show interview. This was a battle of wills between two men who refused to back down. And as Harry's anger reached its boiling point, it became clear that something was about to explode that would change everything about this night. Maher stood up now too, matching Harry's energy, with his own brand of New York grit. "You want to talk about your mother? Let's talk about your mother. Diana worked within the system to create change. She didn't run away to California and start a podcast empire. She stayed and fought, even when it was hard, even when it hurt." Harry's face went white, then red, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. "How dare you? How dare you sit there and lecture me about my own mother when you've never sacrificed anything for anyone in your life? You're a comedian who thinks controversy equals wisdom. I'm a comedian who calls out hypocrisy when I see it." Maher shot back, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "And what I see is a man who had the chance to be a force for good within one of the world's most influential institutions, and instead chose to become a professional victim." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Harry's breathing became labored, his chest rising and falling rapidly. For a moment, it looked like he might actually take a swing at the host. The security team, positioned discreetly around the studio, tensed and moved slightly closer to the stage. "Professional victim?" Harry's voice was barely controlled now, each word dripping with venom. "You want to know about victims, Bill? Victims are the people who can't speak up for themselves. Victims are the ones who don't have a platform, who don't have resources, who can't fight back when the machine comes for them." Maher wasn't backing down. "And what have you done for those people, Harry? Really? Besides talk about yourself and your problems? You had access to the highest levels of power and influence, and you walked away from it all because your feelings got hurt." "My feelings got hurt." Harry's voice cracked with incredulous rage. "My wife was suicidal, Bill. Suicidal. And when we went to the institution for help, they told us it would be bad for the brand. They cared more about their image than her life." The audience gasped audibly at this revelation, but Maher pressed on relentlessly. "And that's terrible, Harry. It really is. But you know what? Millions of people deal with mental health issues every day without the resources you have. They don't get to escape to a mansion in Montecito and sign Netflix deals. They have to stay and fight." Harry's composure finally cracked completely. "You think this is easy? You think any of this has been easy? We gave up everything. Our home, our family, our country, to protect our children and our sanity. And people like you sit in your comfortable studios and judge us for it. I judge you for becoming exactly what you claim to hate." Maher fired back, his voice rising to match Harry's intensity. "You've become the very media circus you say you wanted to escape. Every interview, every book, every documentary, it's all about you, your pain, your story. Meanwhile, your brother is actually doing the work you abandoned." The mention of William was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Harry's eyes blazed with fury, and he stepped closer to Maher, close enough that the host could see the rage burning in his eyes. "Don't you dare bring my brother into this. You don't know anything about my family dynamics." "I know enough," Maher said, standing his ground despite Harry looming over him. "I know that he's carrying the weight of the crown while you're carrying the weight of your grudges. I know that he's preparing to be king while you're preparing for your next publicity tour." Harry's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting. "You have no idea what you're talking about. None. You sit here in your bubble, making jokes about things you don't understand, judging people whose shoes you could never fill." "Maybe not," Maher conceded, but his tone remained defiant. "But I know authenticity when I see it. And I know performance when I see it. And everything you've done since leaving the royal family has been one long, expensive performance." The studio fell into an eerie silence as the two men faced off, neither willing to back down. Harry's hands were shaking now, whether from anger or adrenaline. It was impossible to tell. Maher stood perfectly still, his jaw set, his eyes locked. On Harry's. "You want authentic." Harry's voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried the weight of years of suppressed anger. "Here's authentic. Every day, I wake up knowing that I made the hardest decision of my life to protect my family. Every day, I live with the knowledge that I'll never have the relationship with my father and brother that I want because I chose my wife and children over an institution that would have destroyed us." Maher's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "And that's noble, Harry. It really is. But you can't have it both ways. You can't claim you want privacy while courting publicity. You can't claim you want to heal relationships while publicly attacking your family. You can't claim you want to move forward while constantly relitigating the past." "I'm not attacking my family," Harry protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm telling my truth about what happened." "Your truth," Maher repeated again, shaking his head. "There's that phrase again. Look, Harry, I get it. You're angry. You feel betrayed. You feel like the system failed you. But at some point, you have to stop being the victim and start being the solution." Harry's face contorted with frustration and pain. "You think I haven't tried to be the solution? You think I haven't spent every day since leaving trying to figure out how to use my platform for good? But every time I speak up about anything, mental health, social justice, the environment, people like you reduce it to family drama. Because that's what you keep making it about," Maher shot back. "Every interview, every speech, every project somehow comes back to your grievances with the royal family. You had the chance to be a global advocate for the causes you care about, and instead, you became a professional whistleblower against your own family." The words hit Harry like a physical blow, and for a moment, he stood there speechless, his mouth opening and closing without sound. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion and barely controlled rage. "You know what, Bill? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am angry. I'm angry that my wife was treated like garbage by people who should have protected her. I'm angry that my son will grow up knowing his grandfather's institution chose protocol over his grandmother's mental health. And I'm angry that people like you think that makes me the villain in this story." The tension in the studio had reached an almost unbearable level. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably, some looking toward the exits, others pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming television history. The camera operators continued filming, but their faces showed the same shock and concern as everyone else in the room. Maher took a step closer to Harry, his voice dropping to a more intimate level, but losing none of its intensity. "I don't think you're the villain, Harry. I think you're a man who's been through hell and is trying to make sense of it. But I also think you're letting your pain turn you into something you don't want to be." Harry's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but his voice remained steady and dangerous. "And what's that, Bill? What am I becoming?" "Someone who's more interested in being right than being happy," Maher replied quietly. "Someone who's more interested in winning the argument than winning back the relationships that matter." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, it seemed like the confrontation might de-escalate. But then Harry's face hardened again, and his voice turned cold. "You want to know what I'm becoming, Bill? I'm becoming someone who doesn't need your approval, or the media's approval, or anyone else's approval to know that I made the right choice for my family. And if that makes me the villain in your story, then so be it." The battle lines were drawn, and both men knew there was no going back from this point. Mar circled around his desk, his eyes never leaving Harry's face. You know what your problem is, Harry? You think being right is more important than being effective. You think moral superiority is a substitute for actual accomplishment. Harry's laugh was bitter and hollow. Accomplishment? What would you know about accomplishment? You've spent your entire career making jokes about other people's lives while contributing nothing of substance to the world. I've spent my career holding powerful people accountable. Mar fired back, his voice rising again. Including spoiled princes who think their personal trauma gives them the right to destroy centuries of tradition. Spoiled. Harry's voice cracked with incredulous fury. Spoiled. You think losing my mother at 12, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan, and watching my wife nearly die from the pressure of royal life makes me spoiled? Mar didn't flinch. I think having every advantage in life and then complaining about it to anyone who'll listen makes you spoiled. I think having access to platforms that most people can only dream of and using them primarily to settle personal scores makes you spoiled. Harry began pacing like a caged animal, his hands running through his hair in frustration. You want to talk about platforms? Let's talk about platforms. You have a platform right here, every week, to discuss real issues. Climate change, social justice, mental health awareness. But instead, you choose to spend your time attacking people who are actually trying to make a difference. Making a difference. Mar's voice dripped with sarcasm. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're making a fortune off your family's misery while pretending it's activism. The accusation hit Harry like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed red with rage. You think this is about money? You think I wanted any of this? I had a life, Bill. I had a purpose. I had a family that I loved, even with all its flaws. And I gave it all up because staying would have killed the woman I love. And I respect that sacrifice, Mar said, his tone becoming more serious. But what I don't respect is the way you've weaponized that sacrifice. Every interview, every book, every documentary is another grenade thrown at your family. And you justify it all by claiming you're helping people. Harry stopped pacing and turned to face Mar directly, his eyes blazing with fury. You want to know who I'm helping? I'm helping every person who's ever felt trapped in a toxic situation and been told they have to stay because of duty or tradition. I'm helping every person who's ever been told that their mental health doesn't matter as much as appearances. And you could have done all of that without burning bridges with your family, Mar countered. You could have been a voice for change from within the system instead of a voice of destruction from outside it. Harry's composure finally shattered completely. The system doesn't change from within, he screamed, his voice echoing off the studio walls. I tried for years to change it from within. I begged them to modernize, to adapt, to show compassion. And they chose their precious protocols over human lives every single time. The audience sat in stunned silence, some covering their mouths in shock. This was beyond anything they had expected to witness. Mar stood his ground, but even he seemed taken aback by the raw emotion pouring out of Harry. So you ran away, Mar said quietly, but his words carried like a thunderclap in the silence. When things got tough, when the fight got hard, you ran away to America and started a new life funded by telling the world how terrible your old life was. Harry's eyes filled with tears of rage and frustration. I didn't run away. I made a choice. The hardest choice of my life. I chose my wife and children over an institution that would have destroyed them. And I'd make that choice again 1,000 times over. Even if it meant never speaking to your father again. Mar pressed, sensing he'd found a nerve. Even if it meant your children will grow up not knowing their grandfather, their uncle, their cousins. The question hung in the air like a sword over Harry's head. For a moment, his anger seemed to deflate, replaced by something that looked like profound sadness. But then his jaw set again, and his voice turned cold and determined. My children will grow up knowing that their father chose love over duty, authenticity over appearance, and truth over tradition. They'll know that when it mattered most, I protected them instead of sacrificing them to an institution that cares more about its image than its people. Mar shook his head slowly. And they'll also grow up knowing that their father chose public revenge over private reconciliation. They'll know that he turned family pain into entertainment for the masses. That's enough, Harry said, his voice deadly quiet. You've crossed every line there is to cross tonight, Bill. You've questioned my motives, my marriage, my love for my children, and my respect for my mother's memory. But I won't sit here and let you rewrite history to make me the villain. I'm not rewriting anything, Maher replied, his own voice growing quieter but losing none of its intensity. I'm just pointing out that victims don't usually get multi-million-dollar deals for being victims. Heroes don't usually profit from their heroism. And people who claim to want privacy don't usually give tell-all interviews every few months. Harry stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras, the nervous breathing of the audience, the tick of the clock on the wall. You know what, Bill? Harry said finally, his voice eerily calm. You're absolutely right about one thing. I am angry. I'm angry that my wife was treated like garbage. I'm angry that my son's security was taken away out of spite. I'm angry that I had to choose between my family's safety and my family's approval. He paused, his eyes never leaving Maher's face. But mostly, I'm angry that I wasted the last hour of my life trying to explain myself to someone who was never going to listen in the first place. Maher opened his mouth to respond, but Harry held up a hand to stop him. No, Bill. You've had your say. You've made your points. You've gotten your confrontation for the cameras. But I'm done playing this game. Harry began unhooking his microphone, his movements sharp and deliberate. You want to know what my mother would think about all this? She'd think it was tragic that her son had to choose between his family's love and his family's survival. She'd think it was heartbreaking that speaking the truth about abuse and neglect makes you the villain instead of the hero. The microphone pack hit the floor with a dull thud as Harry tossed it aside. But most of all, she'd think it was pathetic that a talk show host thinks he understands the complexities of royal life better than someone who lived it for 35 years. Maher tried one last time to salvage the situation. Harry, wait. We can. No. Harry cut him off, his voice final and absolute. We can't. This conversation is over. This interview is over. And my patience with people who think they know better than I do about my own life is over. Harry turned toward the studio exit, then paused and looked back at Maher one final time. You know what the real tragedy is, Bill? You had the chance to have a real conversation tonight about mental health, about institutional reform, about the courage it takes to choose love over legacy. Instead, you chose to be another voice in the chorus of people who think they know better than I do about what's best for my family. With that, Harry Windsor turned and walked toward the exit, his shoulders straight, his head held high. The audience watched in stunned silence as he strode past the cameras, past the production crew, and out of the studio without looking back. Maher stood alone on the stage, watching the door close behind his departed guest. The studio remained silent for several long moments before he finally turned to face the cameras, his expression unreadable. Well, he said quietly, adjusting his jacket and running a hand through his hair. I guess we'll have to go to commercial. A little early tonight. The red recording light on the cameras finally went dark, but the tension in the studio lingered long after the confrontation had ended. What had started as a celebrity interview had become something much more significant. A battle between two worldviews, two approaches to handling pain and conflict, and two very different ideas about what it means to be authentic in public life. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience began to file out, still buzzing with shock and excitement over what they had witnessed, one thing was clear. This was a night that would be talked about for years to come. Bill Maher had gotten his confrontation, but at what cost? And Prince Harry had made his point, but had anyone really been listening? The answers to those questions would have to wait for another day, another show, another conversation. But for now, the battle was over, and both men would have to live with the consequences of what had been said in the heat of the moment.